Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Learn Commerce with Namita. I am Namita Mane. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss about Sale of Goods Act 1930. This act is also called as SOGA 1930. In today's lecture, this is the part 1 of Sale of Goods Act. In this part, we are going to discuss about important definition, important terms related to Sale of Goods Act. So without wasting time, let's start the session. Introduction. The Sale of Goods Act 1930 came into force on 1st July 1930. Basically, sale of goods was a part of Indian Contract Act. In the year 1930, Sale of Goods Act means sections for or provisions of Sale of Goods Act was made separately. A separate law regarding Sale of Goods Act was set up. Okay, so Sale of Goods Act 1930 it came into force on 1st July 1930. Sale of goods is one of the specific form of contract. Okay, which type of contract means specific form of contract means the contract of sale. Contract of sale. And basically the sale happens only between the buyer and seller. Okay, so seller transfer goods or transfers ownership to the buyer and buyer purchase the goods from the seller. Okay, so seller sells the goods to the buyer and buyer purchase goods from the seller. So this is a contract between buyer and seller, and the contract between buyer and seller is of sale. Sale of what? Sale of goods. Okay, so to govern this act, to govern this buyer and seller's transaction, there is a act, and that act is called as Sale of Goods Act. Okay, and a sale of goods is one of the specific form of contract which is recognized and regulated by law in India. SOGA 1930 allows the party means allows the buyer and the seller to modify the provisions of law by express stipulation. Means in Sale of Goods Act there are some provisions which means there are some freedom which is given to the parties. Parties means the buyer and the seller to modify some provisions relating to some terms. Okay, like delivery of goods, payment of price, etc. But in some places the provisions are so strictly, means the buyer and the seller has to follow as per the act only. So few provisions the buyer and the seller can modify it. They can change some provisions only in terms of delivery of goods, payment of price, and so on. But however, in some places this freedom is severely restricted. Okay, that means in some cases the freedom is there, and in some places or in some provision the law is strict. And this Sale of Goods Act contains provisions, or it is governed relating to sale of movable property. Movable property means the goods which can be moved from one place to another place. And this act, Sale of Goods Act, is applicable to whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, so this is a short introduction about this act. Next we'll move to the important definitions in this in Sale of Goods Act. So first definition is buyer and seller. Okay, so buyer and seller are important because buyer and seller are important in Sale of Goods Act because they decide the sale. Okay, they decide the sale means a buyer purchase the goods from the seller and seller sell the goods to the buyer. So they are important in the contract of goods. So under section 2 subsection 1, buyer means a person who buys or agrees to buy the goods. Okay, so buyer is a person who buys the goods from the other person, and other person is who? The seller. Or the buyer is the person who agrees, okay, who agrees to buy the goods. And section 2 subsection 13, seller means the person who sells the goods or agrees to sell goods. Buyer and seller are complementary and represents the two parties. Two parties means the buyer and seller to the contract of sale of goods. Okay, so buyer and the seller are two complementary. If there is a seller, then there will be buyer. If there is a buyer, then there is a seller. A lone person cannot be a seller, and a lone person cannot be the buyer also. So we require, in a contract, we require two people. One is the seller and second is the buyer. Okay, and they represents the contract. They represents to a contract of sale of goods. Now goods can be anything. Okay, so we are going to see what does the goods means, the definition of goods also. So in the contract of sale of goods, there are two people. One is the buyer and second is seller. Okay, so they are important in the contract of sale of goods. Next definition is contract of sale of goods. Contract of sale of goods as per section 4. A contract of sale of goods is a contract. Okay, a contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller, okay, whereby the seller transfers or agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for a price. Okay, now here in this definition, the word property means ownership. Okay, means ownership. So a contract of sale of goods is what? It is a contract between seller and the buyer. So seller is going to transfer the goods. Along with the goods, he is transferring the ownership of that goods to the buyer, and in return the buyer is paying some money, means he is giving some consideration in return of that good. Means buyer is going to purchase the goods from the seller, and in return buyer is going to make the payment of that specific goods. Okay, that's why once the buyer does the payment to the seller, the ownership of that, legally the ownership of that good becomes of the buyer. Okay, so a contract of sale of good is a contract whereby the seller transfers or agrees to transfer the ownership. Okay, this property means the ownership in goods to the buyer for a price. Okay, for a price, the seller is transferring the ownership of the goods to the buyer. And the contract of sale may be absolute or conditional. Okay, now absolute means immediately if the seller is selling the goods to the buyer, means transferring the ownership to the buyer, it is absolute. And if there is a condition kept, then it becomes the agreement to sell. There are two types of contract of sale. One is absolute and second is conditional. If it is absolute, then it becomes sale, and if it is a condition, it becomes agreement to sell. Okay, so difference between sell and agreement to sell. Agreement to sell. Agreement to sell. There is a difference between sell, okay, S-A-L-E, and agreement to sell. So sell, this sell means this sell, S-A-L-E, sell means once, means immediately. In sell, the goods are transferred, the ownership is transferred to the buyer immediately. Okay, means immediately means absolute. Okay, and if the goods are transferred after some time or in the future time or in future date, then and along with some condition kept, then it becomes agreement to sell. Okay, so agreement to sell means where the transfer of property, where the transfer of ownership in goods is to take place at a future time or subject to some condition thereafter to be fulfilled, it is called as agreement to sell. Okay, now for example, to understand agreement to sell, for example, there is a farmer and there is a buyer. So buyer says to the farmer, means farmer basically it is a seller. So buyer says to the farmer to give 10 quintals of onion to me. So farmer says, yes, I will give you 10 quintals of onions to you, but after 3 months. Okay, now farmer is agreeing to sell the onions to the buyer. He is agreeing to sell the onions to the buyer, but there is a condition kept, that farmer has kept some condition that he will give the onions to buyer, but after 3 months. Okay, so this is the agreement to sell. This is what agreement to sell means. Onions farmer is going to give to the buyer, means he is going to give the goods, the ownership of goods at future time after 3 months. Okay, so after 3 months the buyer is going to get the ownership of that onions. At present he is not getting it. If at present, if the farmer sells the goods to the buyer, then it is called as sale of goods. The ownership is transferred immediately. But if after 3 months, if the farmer is going to give to the buyer, then it is agreement to sell. He is agreeing to pay it. He is agreeing to give the onions to the buyer. Okay, so where the transfer of ownership in goods is to take place at a future time or subject to some condition thereafter to be fulfilled, it is called as agreement to sell. Next definition is of price. Price under section 2 subsection 10. Price means the money. Okay, price means the value of that goods, the money consideration for a sale of goods. So if the seller is selling the goods to the buyer, so in return buyer has to give some consideration, and that consideration should be in terms of money. Okay, so this is the definition of price. Next we'll see some basic difference between sell and agreement to sell. Okay, so SALE is sell and agreement to sell SELL. This is the difference. So meaning of sell, where the property means ownership in goods has passed from the seller to the buyer, it is called as sell. So when the ownership of good has immediately passed from seller to the buyer, it is called as sell. Agreement to sell means where the transfer of ownership in goods is to take place at a future time or subject to some condition thereafter to be fulfilled, it is called as agreement to sell. Now the next difference is of transfer of property, means transfer of ownership. Now in sell, the property or the ownership of goods is passed to the buyer immediately. Okay, so ownership of goods is passed from seller to the buyer immediately, whereas in agreement to sell, ownership of goods passed to the buyer on future date or on fulfillment of some condition. So if the farmer says after 3 months I am going to give you the onions to the buyer, then after 3 months the ownership of that onion is passed to the buyer. Nature of contract or nature of ownership. In sell, the nature of contract is executed contract. That means the contract for which the consideration has been paid. Means immediately, means both the party, buyer and the seller, has executed their responsibility. Okay, they both has executed the responsibility. Means seller sold the goods to the buyer, and buyer in return of that goods he paid the consideration. Now whereas in agreement to sell, it is the nature of contract is executory contract, means one party has to perform his duty. Okay, so that means the contract for which consideration is to be paid at a future date. So means at least buyer or seller, they both has to perform their duty at a future date. So that is executory contract. Now risk involved in sale is risk of loss is that of buyer, since the risk follows the ownership. Now risk is involved in sale also and in agreement to sell also, but who is going to bear that risk? Now in sale, the buyer is going to bear the risk. Okay, so risk of loss in the sale contract is with buyer, because the ownership is immediately transferred to the buyer. So risk is in the hands of buyer, and in agreement to sell, the risk of loss is of seller, because seller is going to give the goods to the buyer at future date. That's why the risk involves till it reaches to the hand in the hands of buyer, the risk is in the hand of seller only. Okay, so risk is involved in agreement to sell with the seller. Now the rights of resale. Now rights of resale in the sale, the seller cannot resell the goods, because immediately seller is going to give the goods to the buyer and he is transferring the ownership to the goods to the buyer. So the seller cannot has rights to resell the goods to other person. But in agreement to sell, the seller may resell the goods, since the ownership is with the seller only. So in agreement to sell, the seller can sell the goods to other person, because the seller has time, because the contract between them has made for future date. So he has the time space. If he gets the buyer, a second buyer who is ready to pay him extra amount, then he can sell the goods to that person. Okay, so this is the difference between sell and agreement to sell. Next we'll move to the definition of goods. Now Sale of Goods Act 1930. Now what do you mean, or what is the definition of goods? Now goods means every kind of movable property. So goods means every kind of movable property other than actionable claims and money. Now you can see these pictures. By this picture you can understand the definition of goods. Now goods means, goods may be anything. Okay, goods may be anything like your clothes, cupboard, refrigerator, book, laptop, table, fan, etc., etc. There are many goods. Okay, so goods means every kind of movable property. Movable property means which can be moved from one place to another place. Book, if you are holding the book, you can keep that book to another place also. So it is a moving property. So goods means every kind of movable property other than actionable claims and money. Okay, so actionable claim and money cannot be goods. Now what is money and actionable claim? Now money means what? Money is what? A currency note or cash. Okay, cash, currency note cannot be good. Now what does actionable claim means? Actionable claims means the debt due from one person to another person is called as actionable claim. Okay, if suppose one person is remaining to pay the money to other person, then that is called as actionable claim. is not a goods. So I will repeat again. Actionable claim means debt. Okay, DEBT, debt due from one person to another is an actionable claim. And money means cash or currency note. These two things cannot be goods. And goods also includes stock, shares, growing crops, grass, and things attached to or forming part of land. Okay, so along with movable property, goods include stocks, shares, growing crops, and grass, and the things attached to or forming part of land. Okay, so goods which are grown on land are considered as goods. Okay, now you have one question. Now tree or grass or crops are growing on land. The full land cannot be moved from one place to another place, but growing crops and grass are considered as goods because after the crops are grown, or grass are grown, you are going to cut down, and you are going to, whatever you have cut down the crops, you are going to sell it to the other person. So it is called as movable property. Okay, so once the crops are grown, you are going to cut it down, you are going to take it, and you are going to sell it to the other person. So it is moving from one place to another place, it is moving from one hand to another hand. That is why growing crops, shares, stocks, grass, and things which are attached or forming a part of land is considered as goods. And goods means every kind of movable property, so which are agreed to be served before sale or under the contract of sale will be considered as goods. Okay, so I will repeat the definition of goods again. Goods means every kind of property. Okay, sorry, goods means every kind of movable property other than actionable claim and money, and includes stock, share, growing crops, grass, and other things attached to or forming part of land which are agreed to be served before sale or under the contract of sale, which will be considered as goods. Next we'll see classification of goods, means types of various goods. Now there are three types of goods. First is existing goods, future goods, and third is contingent goods. Okay, so first we'll see what is existing goods. Okay, so existing goods means the goods which are either owned or possessed by the seller at the time of contract of sale. In short, these are the goods which are in actual existence at the time of contract of sale. Okay, and further existing goods are classified in three types. Now first we'll understand what is existing goods. Existing goods are those goods which are actually exist in at the time of contract of sale. Now for example, there is a buyer and there is a seller. Okay, there are two persons, one is the buyer and one is the seller. Now in between these two people, the contract happens. Now contract is of what? The seller is going to sell the car to the buyer. Okay, and buyer is going to purchase that car from the seller. Now when the seller is going to sell the car to the buyer, at that time the car is actually present. The seller is actually having the car with himself. That is called as existing goods. Existing goods. Okay, when the contract happens, at that time whatever goods you want to sell to the buyer, that is called as existing good. At present or along with you, if the goods is there, it is called as existing goods. When you go to the shop and you ask for the book from the shopkeeper, and if the book if the shopkeeper is having the book to sell to the buyer, so that book is called as existing. It is existing at the time of the contract, so that is called as existing goods. Now further, existing goods are classified as follow. Existing goods are further classified as three types of goods. One is specific goods, second is certain goods, and third is uncertain goods. So to understand the classification of existing good, we will first see what is a certain goods, then we'll come to the first we'll see uncertain goods, then we'll see certain goods, and then specific goods. Okay, so first we'll see certain uncertain goods. Now uncertain goods are the goods which are not specifically identified or asserted at the time of making the contract, and basically they are indicated or defined only by the descriptions or sample. Now for example, suppose you are the buyer and you visit to a electronic showroom. You are a buyer, okay? If you are a buyer and you visit to some electronic showroom, and you go to that electronic showroom and okay, we'll take one example to understand uncertain goods. Now suppose you are the buyer, okay, you are buyer and you visit to one electronic showroom. Now under electronic showroom there will be various electronics goods, and you go to that electronic showroom, but you are confused, you don't know what to buy from electronic showroom. So now in front of you in electronic showroom, you may have the option of mobile phone, television, then watches, etc. Now you have many options in front of you in the electronic showroom, and when you don't know what to buy from these goods, what to buy from mobile, what to buy from watches, what to buy from television, then these are called as uncertain goods. When you are not decided which product to buy, from which shop to buy, that goods are called as uncertain goods. Okay, so see, if A agrees to sell to B one packet of soap out of a lot of 100 packets lying in his shop, it is a sale of uncertain goods because it is not known which packet is to be delivered. Now there are 100 packets of soap of various brand. If the seller or if the buyer don't know which soap to deliver, the seller don't know that which soap to deliver to the buyer, then it is called as uncertain goods. Okay, so now we'll go back to next goods, that is a certain good. Now a certain good is what? A certain goods are those goods which are identified in accordance with the agreement after the contract of sale is made. Now when out of a bulk of a certain goods, the quantity extracted is identified and a set for a particular contract. Okay, now once you go in the electronic showroom, okay, for example, you go to the electronic showroom and you are confused, you don't know what things to purchase from the electronic showroom, so it becomes what? Uncertain goods. Now once you finalize from the electronic showroom, you have the option to purchase mobile phone, you have option to purchase watches, so you decide to purchase mobile phone. So now to purchase this mobile phone, it becomes a certain goods. Okay, from the bulk, from a huge bulk of electronic showroom, you categorize only one product, that is only one good, that is what? Mobile phone. that is a certain goods. Okay, so for example, a wholesaler of cotton has 100 bales in his godown and he agrees to sell 50 bales, and these bales are selected and set aside on the selection of goods becomes a certain goods. Means from one bulk, okay, from thousands of bulk you select one particular, you select one good, that is called as a certain goods. Next we'll go to specific goods. Now specific goods means goods identified and agreed upon at the time of contract is made. Okay, at the time of contract of sale is made. Now first we will take the previous example of electronic showroom. First you visited to the showroom, electronic showroom, and you were not aware which goods to take. Okay, so you that which goods to take, so it becomes uncertain goods. Now once you select one particular product, that is what, mobile phone, so it becomes what, a certain goods. Now from that mobile also, which company or which brand of mobile phone you want to purchase. Suppose you select a Samsung Galaxy Prime. Okay, so that is called, that product or that good is called as specific good. Means out of that mobile phone you have selected to purchase Samsung, and from that Samsung brand also you are selecting to you have selected to purchase Galaxy Prime mobile model. Okay, so it is called as specific good. Goods identified and agreed upon at the time of a contract of sale is made. So example, any specified and finally decided goods like a Samsung Galaxy Prime, LG washing machine of 10 kgs, etc. So those are called as specific goods. Clear? I hope you have understood what is existing goods and types of existing goods. Types of existing goods are of three types: specific goods, certain goods, and uncertain goods. First of all, classification of goods are done in three types: existing good, future goods, and contingent goods. Existing goods I have explained you already, and existing goods is further classified as specific goods, certain goods, and uncertain goods. Now we'll move to future goods. What is future goods? And the last point, contingent goods. Now future goods under section 2 subsection 6, it is defined as future goods means goods to be manufactured or produced or acquired by the seller after making the contract of sale. In other words, these are the goods which are not in exist at the time of contract of sale. Okay, so at the time of contract of sale, if the goods is there existed, then it is called as existing goods. If the goods are not existed, then it is called as future good. Now for example, P agrees to sell Q the entire crop of onions that his farm would yard in the next season at rupees 300 per quintal. Okay, so P is the seller and Q is the buyer. So in between P and Q there was a contract to take the onions, but when P is selling to Q, at that time he is not having the onions, so that is not a type of existing good. So P agrees to sell the onions to Q in the next season. In the next season means after 3 months, after 4 months, etc. Whatever the time will be there. So it is called as future goods, means the goods which are going to have manufactured in future. At the time of contract, the goods are not present, but it will be present in future time. Then it is called as future goods. Next is contingent goods. Now contingent goods means under section 6 subsection 2, Contingent goods are the acquisition of which by the seller depends upon an uncertain contingency or events are called as contingent goods. Now contingent goods depends on the uncertain situation, uncertain condition, uncertain events. Okay, now for example, if there is a fisherman and there is a buyer. Fisherman, basically it is a seller. So buyer says to the fisherman that I want 1000 fish from you. So fisherman says that okay, I will give you 1000 of fish to you after 5 days. But after 5 days, if there is any cyclone in any sea or in any river, I will not give you fish. And if there is no cyclone, then I can give you 1000 of fish. So now here the contingent goods, the fish are future. After 5 days means it becomes future. But along with that 5 days, there is one condition which the fisherman has kept. That condition is that if there is cyclone, I will not give you fish, and if there is no cyclone, I will give you if there is a cyclone, I cannot give you fish, and if there is no cyclone, I can give you fish. So now this fish, okay, fish is what? Goods. Now this fish depends on what? Uncertain events. Okay, if cyclone is there, fisher cannot give the fish to the buyer, and if cyclone is there, the fisher cannot give the goods to the buyer, and if cyclone is there, if cyclone is there, the fisherman will not give the goods to the buyer, and if cyclone is not there, fisherman will give goods to the buyer. Okay, so this is contingent goods. So I hope you have understood the basic definition, the basic terms related to Sale of Goods Act 1930. Thank you very much. Please subscribe my YouTube channel, like and share the video, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the latest notification.